Good afternoon. After a wonderful high tea session from Osmania University Center for International Programs, we are all back to the auditorium. We are now just about to begin the keynote address. The keynote talk will be delivered by Professor Devashish Langi of Inspirare Arts Foundation, and our honorable chairperson for this keynote lecture will be Professor A. Karunakar, who is Dean Faculty of Arts, Osmania University. We are very honored to have Professor A. Karunakar with us today for chairing the session. And now all over to you, Karunakar sir, for conducting the session. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon to all. I invite you for the keynote address by Professor Devashish Langi.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A lot has been said even in the course of this inaugural session. A lot has been said in the inaugural session with regard to dystopia, with regard to how dystopia gathers sentiments, ideas, prognostications, perceptions, misconceptions, fears together, and creates an atmosphere, let us put it this way, a climate. I've titled the presentation today, the keynote address today, as Gluing a Fractured Lens, Spectral Dystopia and Archetypal Image Making. As is evident from the title, I will try to divide my talk to you today, and I try to share a few ideas with you into two parts. In the first part, let me tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to give you a summary of all the great European and American dystopian texts, some of which have been obviously referred to. I mean, the great writers like from Orwell upwards. I'm not going to do that. My humble interjection this afternoon before you is as a writer myself, as I try to understand what 1 year of pandemic and perhaps 20 to 21 years of dystopia, post-millennial dystopia, can do to a consciousness. How do we react? How do artists react? How do writers react? How does it seem to them? It's very important. How does a dystopia seem to them? It is very easy to define dystopia in political, in sociological, in historical, in cultural terms even. But how does it figure for an artist or a writer? I will try and solve or try and demonstrate perhaps this conundrum, this problem, or also this very exciting new space. How does a work of art come into being? I mean, if we could look behind into the smithy of, let us say, the writer who wrote 1982, 1984, if we could go behind the scenes, if we could go into the mind of Kingsley Amis, what would we see? How did they perceive dystopia? And there have been religious dystopias galore. I mean, the Bible is full, the Old Testament of the Bible is full of religious dystopias. Jeremiah, the two Jeremiahs, that if I could put it that way, of course, St. Jerome. I mean, it's passé to even repeat all of that. So as I said, I will skip all of that. And I will just try and alight very quickly onto something that is very close to me and where I can actually tell you that this is how I would locate myself vis-a-vis the problem of dystopia, regarding the problem of post-pandemic perceptions, living in 2021, and yet, or maybe if I could put it even better, surviving 2020 and finding myself still alive in 2021. What does it mean? Not too many of our fellow brothers and sisters, not only in India but abroad, have not been that lucky. It is a day of reckoning for us as well at this ahead of this conference, because what we have to realize is that we have been lucky. How lucky we are to stay alive, whereas many of our not so lucky brothers and sisters have not made it in 2020. And then the prospect before, we talk about the pandemic making a return. I'm just reminded of Anglo-Saxon poetry, which we teach as teachers in colleges and universities, where there was this metaphor of the returning dragon. The returning of darkness, the returning of the dragon, the peril of the unknown at the end of day, and the beginning of darkness. So we are on the threshold, whether we think in terms of a theoretician like George Agamben, who talks about finitude, the time of the end, etc., or we think in very much of an earlier culture, conceptions of an earlier culture. We are at a crux, we are at a crossroads, let's put it this way. So I would just begin with one little anecdote, which will help me get to my point very quickly. It is that of the wife of Richard Wagner, the great European composer, of course, as we know. Now, Richard Wagner's wife, she edited his collection of essays. This is what he said. He records in one of our pages of our memoirs, and I just quote a little bit from here. Wagner told his wife Cosima, "Do you know that sometimes when I have a musical thought, I catch my mouth set just like Beethoven's in his death mask?" An unusual thing to say. When he has a musical idea, he sees himself dead. And then Cosima adds, "He told me that he dreamt regularly of Beethoven and Goethe with their faces set by death." Also Mozart's. What does it tell us? I mean, we know that the deaths of friends and peers and people whom we idolize matters a lot. But visions of death of the grander kind that grows out of the operatic and musical tradition of which Wagner was one of the principal forces, let us say, moving agents in the late 19th century, this great German titan, if I could put it that way, is very interesting. It kind of crystallizes what I'm trying to get at in today's talk, which is spectrality. You see, a spectre is like a shimmer, it's an impression. If you try to prove whether that was physically possible or physically there, you might come up with a negative answer. But your mind is absolutely certain that these shimmers did exist, these specters, so to say. It's an illusion, it's a shape, but the illusion is absolutely, you're confident about that illusion. It's a contradiction in terms almost. But when you say, "I've seen a spectre," you're so certain that you've seen a spectre, something which does not have any reality of its own. So spectrality of dystopia is what I'm trying to get at. How does dystopia occur to us? You see, we do not react just to a pandemic, just to a death toll, just to a program on television which is almost like a doomsday prophecy. It's not just that. Many small things add up to this entire notion of a dystopia. And we are always told that dystopia has to have a political angle. How does it happen? How does it crystallize? I mean, let us say a couple of deaths in the family or deaths amongst friends and well-known people. How does that have a political implication? It is like this, and writers actually see it this way. What they do is, once you have these deaths, once you have these negative vibes, once you have notions of another lockdown looming over you somewhere, everything that you look at assumes a negative air. And you start thinking, if India is playing a T20 match, you think they're going to lose. So the negativity has seeped so deep into you. If you are in search of a bus, which will take you to a destination on time, you think the bus is not coming today. I mean, we think these are very trivial things, but these are the trivia of day to day, the journal of day to day. That what we call the word, if I could use, accretion of these terms over a period of time. That's what creates this impression that the world has gone dark, the world is bad, there is no prospect, there is no hope. It adds up to that. Little homely details which we disregard as the trivial minutiae of our lives. That is what adds up to dystopia and the spectrality of dystopia in an artist's mind. Now, the deconstruction, therefore, at the heart of spectrality is performed always, therefore, in the context of clear and present danger. Such a sense of danger is to be found in theorists as diverse as Jean-Paul Sartre, Foucault, and Jacques Derrida. The danger that the marking of those archaic structures of primal concern, I mean, it stirs some primal concerns in us. You see, when we are confronted with times like we have over the last year or so, the primal fears, the primal concerns, which the whole host, the panoply of science and politics and other technological advances have not been able to elide, to erase, because they remain just subliminal beneath the surface. They make a comeback. It is those things that make a comeback. And basically, it is this that I am concerned with today. That these revivals, therefore, shall throw to the four winds all scientific, empiricist, materialist walls constructed by modernity. So, dystopia is also a huge test of modernity. In the inaugural session, I tried to make that point, although in brief, that this is a testing time. All the foundations on which our so-called society, the moral, the ethical, the scientific, the humanistic edifices on which society stands, are being tested right now as I even deliver this address to you. This revival in itself constitutes a destruction, and the nature of this destruction is anachronistic. A certain assault on time, on the temporal space, is also very evident. And that is where I would like to go to the second part of my talk, actually, which is to do with the four samples I've drawn from my own writing, because I thought I would put myself to the litmus test in front of you. I should not go and talk about Zamotin and Kingsley Amis and George Orwell, which you know already, which you're very well aware of. But try to put things in perspective as to how a living writer coming in front of you today can see the situation, and exactly if that might help demonstrate certain traits about how dystopia may be responded to. All the theoretical points that I have been making about spectrality, about destruction, about anachronistic principles, about the assault on time, we will see, I will try to demonstrate to you how it has worked for me. Three of these pieces will involve paintings. Three paintings by Van Gogh. You see, it has been my project for some time now, and this is a novella that I'm writing on the last month of Van Gogh's life, June to July 1890, in a very small town, about 30 odd kilometers outside Paris, which is called Auvers-sur-Oise. Oise River flows by, so it's Auvers-sur-Oise, Oise on the bank of the river Oise. He lived in a very humble inn in a garret because didn't have much money and he wanted to save money. So he lived there and he painted like mad. In that 1 month, he painted 92 full-scale paintings, oil on canvas, and about 78 sketches. It was a frenzied period of activity for him. After the slight hiatus of the time that he spent in the asylum at Saint-Romain, from where he came to Auvers because of the Auvers light. He said that one of his friends had told him that the light in Auvers around that time, early summer, is perfect for painting. He wanted to explore that. So he came there. So my novella is made up of that. It's in the form of Van Gogh himself making entries. And the entries are like this. The gist, the summary, the thrust of each entry on any given day is how a painting comes into being. So at the end of that little section, you will find that a painting has come into being. So all the 92 paintings will have one section devoted to it and more. That was the plan of the novella. This was largely executed before the evocation of the lockdown and the insurgence of the pandemic. But I will show you how Van Gogh's perception, I'm speaking in the tongue of Van Gogh, a third person narrative. So I'm getting into Van Gogh's self and I'm narrating. How that brings into focus so many dystopian features in 19th century civilization, and how uncannily afterwards, when I was reading during the long days of lockdown, when I was going back and reading what I had myself written, I was almost astounded by certain correspondences that I could find between what is happening now, the reality, the perception of dystopia as of now, and what I had written, quite unknowingly of the fact that this is going to happen in a few months' time. So I'm going to read a few extracts and talk about them, talk around them. The last painting that I have, that's another visual register that I'm going to use over here, is a painting which has a copy, not this painting, but a very close one. It's executed in the Deccani style, miniature painting, Indian miniature painting, and it has a reflection in the Salarjung Museum in Hyderabad over here. So anybody who has visited Salarjung Museum a few times would recognize the theme of this painting, although this one is not there. This one is drawn from the Islamic Museum in Berlin, but a copy or a version of this painting exists in Salarjung Museum over here as well. So I'm going to use that in the context of one poem of mine. Again, this comes from a collection. Which is to do with entirely with Indian miniature paintings. Either it's the Mughal school or the Pahari school or the Deccani school, chosen paintings from Indian miniature tradition, around which I've tried to weave a web of poetry. 3 poems, a triptych. One poem looking at the original context of the artwork as it was at that time. The second poem giving the artist's imaginary perspective. And the third, a very modern day take on that painting. Now, this poem that I'm going to use, it's called Walk Walk City. It's the third type, a modern day rendition, a modern day response to that painting. So these are the 4 items, visual items, and the texts that I'm going to work with today. So without further ado, let me just start reading from the first of these sections. Now, can we have that? Yeah, just switch off this light if possible. Otherwise, no one will be able to see it. Yeah. Yeah, and Onitesh, could I have slide 1, please? Akash, if you're back room, can I have slide 1? Yes, thank you. Now, this is quite often referred to as the blue portrait. Okay. So, can we switch on this light? Okay, you've seen the painting actually, and many of you might even recognize the painting. It's the painting of Dr. Gachet, the bumbling, busybody doctor, rural doctor, who was a great companion and also a host at different times for Vincent van Gogh when he was in Auvers. As you get off at Auvers station, if you go now, you will find the legend of Gachet painted by, of course, a modern painter on the walls. And any tourist who walks in will be given no respite to the fact that this is Van Gogh's town. So, when you walk on the pavements, you see Vincent, Vincent, Vincent on every one of those brass, things that are put on the road, on the pavements. So this is Vincent City, it's Gachet. This is Dr. Gachet, and this is called Dr. Gachet in Blue, or the midnight portrait of Dr. Gachet, because there is another portrait of Gachet with almost a similar pose, you might say, that he did a few days before. This is 4th of June, 1890, the blue portrait. So I'm going to read this section first, and then I'm going to draw corollaries from it, which will help you better realize how this dystopian thing that I've talked about as spirituality develops out of this, the vision of an artist. What is an artist's perception? You see, artists don't work in vacuum, as we all know. No, none of us work in a vacuum. What was the impression in the mind about the times in which he lived that Van Gogh had? Looking at individual paintings, can we diagnose that? Can we see that? Because every work of hand, whether it's a poem that I write or a painting someone makes or an essay someone writes, it is a reflection of the pressures of the time and what it does and how that person individually and as a member of a certain society negotiates those pressures. So without further ado, I'm reading it. 4th of June, 1890. This is Van Gogh saying, "While painting yesterday, I kept getting distracted by the good doctor's brass buttons. The daughter Margaret is evidently not a good housekeeper. The buttons were all crusted with mold. It was certainly an old coat that he was much fond of, or else he would not be wearing it on such a sultry day. Every now and then he would nervously pull at the buttons and get the moist green verdigris on the end of his fingers, like damp chalk. Because he feared it would alter the pose, he tried not to look down completely. But I noted how his eyes went down furtively without bending his neck and shot suddenly up when he thought I would protest. The chalk-like mold he kept wiping on the red tablecloth, making little green dashes, as though he were composing a painting himself. I tried to paint it as such. The green buttons, their pallor, a minor note in the sonata of pale skin that I have placed him in, leaving his fingertips and marking the tablecloth in the foreground. Today, the choice of blue has roused the night in Gachet's visage. With the light-colored cloth cap, I am having a feeling that this is a peasant portrait of the good doctor. This is important, I'll come back to this. A peasant portrait of the good doctor. The skin scruffy and weather-beaten, far from the delicately wan tones of his melancholy yesterday. If it was the quiet acceptance of fate that I found in him yesterday, today there is a lot more struggle and spirit in the skin. The setting is almost the same as yesterday, save that the foxglove has withered in the heat. But Gachet insisted on keeping it handy. Leaves wither, human beings gather memories, infamies, and the recollected litany of helplessness. They gather it as rust in the flesh or mold on the skin. Gachet's left hand has caught the mold, not a shadow. I hope to make a portrait that would cheer the man up, but I find I have made an altogether more ruinous one. Gachet's eyes, their haunting under my brush, shall endure. I feel sad not so much for him as for myself. The hot sun in the garden blusters, annoyed at my neglect of his irrepressible light. How much darkness do I have within me that I can blind the bright sun with my blue study? Gachet is telling me to have lunch with him. Margaret has arrived and has joined him in insisting she should take better care of her father. Lunch awaits at the Ravots. The first section. Now, as is very evident from what I have written, you see already certain corollaries that I can draw. You see, the fact that Gachet was a busybody, someone who claimed that he was a factotum of the arts, something which was very annoying for Van Gogh actually. He was a man who didn't mind talking too much at that stage of his life because he felt that talking was a wastage of time. It was better that he painted. And Gachet, doctor that he was, and because he was someone who went up to Paris quite frequently, and he had an interest in arts, in the impresario business, you might call it, selling of artworks, and he claimed that he knew a lot about art because he went to these salons and met these artists. So he used to come back with all these ideas, and he used to talk and talk and talk, which did not like. I mean, when Van Gogh did not like. So in other entries, what I talk about over here, what you can easily see is that he doesn't take Gachet very seriously. He's a little wary of him, does not take him seriously, especially his art knowledge. So what was dystopian in this entire first part of what I had written was the notion in Van Gogh that the art world had gone bust, that an artist like himself had nothing to lean back on, fall back on. It was his personal idea. There were many artists working in Paris. Toulouse-Lautrec, for example. Van Gogh had great respect for Toulouse-Lautrec. But then he felt that he was a million miles away from painters like this. He was in Auvers, just 30 kilometers out of Paris, and he felt that he was like an island, almost marooned on an island. He didn't know what the context of these paintings were. He kept repeating to his brother, to anybody who would care to listen, the fact that I do not know what legacy I'm going to leave behind. That was simply because of the fact that he did not know where the milieu in which he was working. What was so special about the milieu? What was he drawing from that milieu himself? Where was he located in that culture? You see, the influx of academism in Parisian art right around the 1890s, that we are talking about 1885, 1890, is something that Van Gogh militated against. He did not like it one bit. He said that these are talkers, not doers. They're talking so much about art. It defers the artwork. Criticism is something that he did not like in that sense, in so many words. So he felt that a simple, realistic rendering of subjects is seen or can be seen by these critics as not nuanced. Sometimes, for example, as an example, prime example is this one, because this is a portrait, supposed to be a portrait. And yet we know, anyone who has delved a little bit into the corpus of Van Gogh's works knows that he was never reputed as a portrait painter. Now, his portraits were terrible, actually. Adeline Ravoux, the daughter of the innkeeper where he was living, he had tried to paint her several times, at least 5 times, with mixed results. But Adeline Ravoux herself, although she was not very old, she was about 13 at that point in time, she did not like any one of those paintings, because the idea was that a certain perfection. There were many professional artists much lower in the ilk than Van Gogh, who were doing perfect portraits, and people wanted their portraits to be done by them. And yet here was a Van Gogh, master artist, who was so unsure of his lines that he said that portrait, and remember, money was in portrait painting. If you painted landscapes, there was hardly any money at that time. Rich patrons would give you anything that you wanted for their portraits to be done perfectly, of course, the perfect portrait. So again, he said that criticism, art history, academism, these were dystopian facts for an artist who was completely a radical, out of the box, like Van Gogh over there. So when he's talking about these things in his painting, how the painting of Gachet, how he sees Gachet, and how these character traits in Gachet are reflected on his face, on his demeanor, on the light that he uses, all these facts. We see how dystopia gets into an artist's response, not only to his time, but to his subject. And I come now to that point where I wrote about, or where I had Van Gogh speaking about the peasant portrait. The earlier portrait that I was talking about, which is naturally called Gachet in black. It's called. This is Gachet in blue, that is Gachet in black. Now, Gachet in black, which was done just about 48 hours before this painting was done on the 4th of June, 1890. That painting has a man with pale skin, with a very sophisticated, no tan on the skin, a very sophisticated look, that the mustache is perfectly crafted. So, this is a dandy. That's the face of a dandy. A man who is, a frequenter of Parisian circles, of polite circles in Paris. So this is a different kind of face, look, demeanor. His hand is resting on a set of novels. So, it places him in a certain intellectual tradition. It places him in a certain cultural milieu of the time. This one, with the dry foxglove, the table that has been marked with his kind of mold on his fingers, his face which is tired, the dark circles beneath his eyes if you look at the painting, the skin that is frayed. This is the tan, frayed, rough skin of a peasant. So, it's almost a a kind of a political statement that is being made by a Van Gogh. Van Gogh has many paintings. I mean, contrary to popular conception that Van Gogh is not someone who is a political painter, he is a political painter. Pradipta knows, for example, the fact that the potato eaters, remember, and then the very famous painting of the shoes, the pair of peasant shoes, just left there on the floor. I mean, he has done some radical work. As he comes to the end of his time on earth, he has refined his art. There are no stark reminders, as in those earlier paintings of the 1860s and 1870s. Here, the remindings, the markings are more subtle, as in this one, the peasant portrait. You know, there is this already, this elite and proletariat divide, gulf developing in the painting. The one that is done 48 hours prior, the one that is done 48 hours afterwards. The same face, the same persona, and yet it has been molded completely different. This Gachet is just like any peasant who has posed for Van Gogh. So the same man, he experiments with the fact, what if I place him in a different situation in life? What if I, for example, instead of standing here at the great Oucip, delivering a intellectually loaded talk to you, what if I were a weather-beaten conduit, a weather-beaten workman? Reference has been made by Professor Karunakar to and the other dignitaries on days. They have made mentions of the migrant workers. I will come to that later. There's a different connection there. So, what if I were one of those, walking down all those thousands of kilometers in that searing heat? Would I look the same like now? Would I seem the same now? Would my mindset be the same now? Would my eyes look tired or fresh? Would I be lisping intellectual verbiage, or would I be just saying, a drop of water, please? Could anyone give me a drop of water, please? I mean, that's basic, life and death. I might take 5 more steps and fall down and die if someone does not give me a drink of water. Although I'm here intellectualizing maybe about water. So, imagine a class where you're teaching Coleridge and you go and say, water, water everywhere, and already dropped a drink. Imagine that man on the street, not 50 yards from where you are, struggling for a glass of water. So, it's a different thing altogether. So, what if I take myself out from my privileged position in society, whatever privilege society has given me, of education and other amenities? If I place myself among the disenfranchised, what would happen then? It's one of those great imaginative leaps that artists have always taken. They've tried to take themselves, for example, because an artist is, of course, supremely gifted with intellectual and other powers. What if he were not gifted, one of the not gifted, not privileged members of society? What would he have been then? What would his day have been then? What would, I mentioned the word minutiae, what would the routine or minutiae of his day have been then? So this is one of the great fascinations that artists have always had, and they have experimented with this fact, which Van Gogh has done over here. So you can see how all these, and this is a dystopia that never goes away. The poor man's dystopia. Being born a poor man, that's a curse, isn't it? In any society, at any age. The prospect that you see in front of you is bleak. Whether the world is coming to an end, whether there's a pandemic around the corner or not. If you have been born poor, if you have been born without education, if you have been born in a particular end of society, you are dystopian already, always already. And this dystopia doesn't go away. Other dystopias may come and go. As I said, spectral, shimmers, perceptions. I might think that come 2022, the plague will be gone. The pandemic will be gone. COVID-19 virus will have been defeated. I can still think on those lines. But a poor man, nothing in his belly and nothing in his mind, what prospects does he stare into? He is always staring into a void. For him, dystopia is always already there. So Van Gogh in that painting, and as I've tried to make him say, imaginatively, of course, in that section out of the novel, he thinks of those people. And somehow he himself, he said, I thought Gachet would be sad, but I find that I'm sad, sadder than Gachet, trying to paint him. The sadness, the negativity, the melancholia filters into me, my personality as an artist. I don't know why I am sad. It's like almost a Hamlet line. I do not know why I am sad. Or a line out of Antonio Bassanian, Merchant of Venice. He keeps saying that I have this melancholy thing, which is like a cloud over my brow. I do not know why I'm sad, but yet I'm sad. So it is that kind of an importation of filial melancholy, which comes across as a as you think of that person as your brother, as your fellow citizen, going through something which you cannot even imagine in your worst nightmares. So again, this one. You see, artists have always used these impressions as a kind of barometer, or sometimes even a thermometer, measure changes of temperature, human temperature, the coldness and the warmth of humanity. They have always tried that. The pressures that rise and fall in society, the tensions in a particular time of our civilization, they've always tried to do that. And Van Gogh is no exception. So with this, I would go to the second excerpt that I'm going to read quickly for you, which is from the 15th of June, 15th of June, 1890. This is not uh, a regular one, slightly different one. Could you go to the second slide, please, Ravi? I don't think anybody is able to see anything. For one moment, can we switch the light off so that they can see, have a glimpse? Just a glimpse. And then I'll just get back. Yeah, just a second. They have already put it here. Akash has put it here. Uh, yeah. Yeah. The color is a slightly too much of the green over here, but you can see the White House in the background. That's the White House. This is classically called Whitfield at Overs with White House in the background. Yeah, there's a wall and then there's the villa, the white villa at the end. So actually, let me tell you, this, in the foreground, if you could imagine the foreground, there is this road that leads from the church to the graveyard where Vincent and Theo are actually buried. Actually, the road is right in front. So the artist was painting, Van Gogh was painting, standing on the road, and he was looking in that direction, towards the east. That is the east, actually. Right. This is, late afternoonish kind of time. Okay, thank you. You can switch on the light now. This is what I have in my proposed novella, Van Gogh as saying. I spoke a little prayer before I came down to breakfast today. I asked the Almighty to deny those dark, bare hours entry into my telling of time on the canvas, into my telling of the August light. Another fine June day has greeted me at the studio window. I will venture bravely into the wheat today. The call of the wheat fields has been too persistent to overlook. It was largely this fear that the wheat would unhinge me that I forced myself away from it. I feel today I can immerse myself in the wheat and not lose myself. My sojourn with the wheat must begin on that stretch behind the church that I have been walking down many a time. There are many views of the wheat, but let me start by using the green of the wheat, the coming ripeness of the year, and the white house, some rich man's villa, as my first study of wheat light. I'll come back to this word wheat light that I used. I am amongst the wheat stalks, transformed like a figure in a miracle. I gaze at the floor of wheat, drifting with its living and dead flowers, lilac and brown, in the faint undertow of the corn, like a barely breathing heart. My eye matures with this wheat. My eye will grow into July. The only way to paint this wheat is to be watchful and receptive, like a hunter. Something beyond unreasoning abstraction will allow me to anticipate the movement of this wheat. I grow hoary before the youth of this June wheat, hoary yet fresh, like the sun that has contemplated wheat for a millennium. I feel like a chess player, combining possibilities in his own mind and testing them, while mixing colors on my palette, testing them upon the futurity of corn. A quiet breeze first tiptoes and then darts across my left shoulder, tickling my warm sweat with a hint of coolness. By the time I realize the fact, it has reached the chalk line of the villa walls and the tree line beyond, standing like a slightly drawn curtain before the sky. In the wheat, it is a small dying pulse, uncomfortably tapping against the wood of my easel, not much unlike the pulse of a dying bird. Do I have a brush fit for this? So this is the second extract. What you find interesting in this is life and death figures very prominently in this particular section. Again, let me tell you, dystopia, bad times, worst times, the premonition of horrible times, it can occur to you on a quiet afternoon like this, on a plangent morning as it was today, slightly cloudy. So nothing needs to happen in front of me. The world doesn't have to go past in front of me. Trains do not have to collide. The earth doesn't have to shatter in front of me for a dystopia or a dystopian spectre to happen to me. Dystopian spectre, in fact, happens in the quietest of days, the most mundane of days, like this one. And it's a plangent view of a field of wheat with a house at the back. And yet, what we find is that the contemplation, how does this crystallize in his mind? How he's going to paint? The thought of his own life, the misery of existence, life and death as philosophical questions. These seem to be coming as problems that need solving, almost as if I've caught my breath. Now I need to get it back. Something as mundane but as important as that. You see, breathing is mundane, isn't it? But yet, if we do not breathe for a few seconds, it can be the end of our lives. So the same thing, you see how life and death so easily enters into Van Gogh's consciousness in that section as he contemplates painting that and ultimately crystallizes into that painting. So it is not just paint that goes into a painting, a whole lot more goes into it. It is not just ink that a pen, a poet, or a novelist uses to write, a lot more goes into it. That's only the material, that's only the techne. What about the physis? The Greeks had this division of techne and physis. What about the physis? What about the philosophical rendering of the world? And so, let us get this very clear. The philosophical rendering of the world to artists definitely is not some recondite theory. It is something as important and timely, as I said, as a breath that has stopped and needs to be revived, as a pulse that has stopped and needs to be revived, as a heart that has stopped beating for a while and needs to be revived. Something as urgent as that. That is the point. So, obviously, the pulse of a dying bird, normalcy of the wheat. Wheat is a normal thing. And yet, for Van Gogh, wheat is a radical thing indeed. There is strife, there is life, there is the threat of death. Everything is there in the wheat field. He says that the call of the wheat fields, I've been trying not to listen to it because that way madness lies, almost, you might say. He has been trying to ignore all that. And yet, he says that today I have some confidence suddenly that I'll be able to better handle it, tackle it. So here I am wading into the sea of wheat and letting myself go and seeing how I come out. So the risk taking as well. So you see, one aspect of dystopia that we keep talking about, keep getting back to, is the governmentality and its role in the control of public vision, either inducing or controlling it, both. So obviously over here, governmentality and death, which is more something that we would understand, especially with the last year's experience, than a Van Gogh. But we find that Van Gogh also has that problem. The official, the political interference even into the territory of death. How is that possible? How can we allow that? Remember in Hamlet, of course, that great soliloquy, where he says that who would in fardels bear grunt and sweat under a weary life? Death is seen as a release. The wise man's contumely, the politicians, you might say red tapeism, everything. To escape all of that, death seems to Hamlet to be the best rejoinder to all of that. And yet, it seems that death itself has been conquered or controlled by governments. I mean, governments have been using death as a way of making a foray into the private spaces that we hold most sanctimonious. That is always the case. That has always been the case. I mean, in America, so as referred to America, in India, in Southeast Asia, and every other part. Dictators or despotic leaders or leaders who do not believe in seceding to the people, the rights of the people, have been using death as this great mechanism of making a foray. Sorrow, something that Derrida has written a lot about, and others, Levinas has written a lot about. Those strong emotions, as not as our strength of our society, but as a weakness, a point of entry for governments to control our private spheres. So obviously over here, he says that the dying pulse of a dead or semi-dead bird hitting against the wood of his canvas. He says that so the canvas is shaking like this days, actually, little dicey. I tried leaning against this days and I was almost falling down. So, what he's saying is that the precarity, to use a very theoretical term, the precarity of such a practice, that is what he's referring to. So you see the dimension of dystopia as precarity. Imagined and, of course, related to at a very personal level. I mean, you could expand this, and this is a very personal vision, but you could expand this. And my attempt in writing that, or trying to write that novel, was to get into that self, the artist's smithy, the foundry where all these ideas take shape. How does a poem come about? How does a painting come about? How does a particular film, come about? The inspiration, that moment, how did it come about? It's very interesting. We are always curious to know. And writers and artists have always themselves tried to ventriloquize, if possible, get into that position, and then challenge themselves if they can come up with some answers, some solutions, some possibilities. So that's the second one. Quickly, I move to the last of my three Van Gogh novel kind of renditions. The third one is the 19th of June. This one is can we have the we have slide 3, please. Right. So as he prepares this, let me read a small section which will help you relate to what I'm trying to say. This is a section. There are many entries. I've skipped all of that and just selected certain out. Yes, so this is wheat fields and overs with a cloudy sky. This is not the most famous one of those. There is a very famous one, which is the theme on my laptop, actually. This is another one, but that one is actually called wheat fields and overs under an angry sky. This one is just clouds under a cloudy sky. Now this is enough. You can just keep the slide over here. I'm going to read a slide before that. First, this is the 4th of July, actually. 4th of July, 1890. This one. I'll come to that. But let me read the 19th of June entry. This one is is not accompanied with a painting. This is Van Gogh sitting in his home or in his garret in the evening. We have to remind ourselves that although sunlight is there for a very long time in Europe in summer, around 8 o'clock, it was a little dark to paint indoors. And they did not have any electric lights, so it was candles, so they couldn't paint. So basically, you have to finish painting by about 6, more or less, on a summer's day. And at 8 o'clock, he's sitting in the Rabo Inn, and this is what he has to say or think. My madness returns in dreams. I can see Vincent becalmed on a shoal of fear and hesitation, hemmed in by the rush of waves, not salt water, but wheat. I call my own name across an ocean of wheat, and it echoes return to me like the cry of seagulls. I am a figment of my own memory. Time has been the deferment of me. Sorrow was sparing of me. Time ought not to have been so kind to my hellebore. My hellebore lay in the wheat, and I was Hamlet sitting on a furrow beside the wheat, beside myself in fear, musing on what I might find of myself in the wheat. I have seen the wind here in hours. This last month I have mended my frayed covenant with the sun. Now it's the wind's turn. I have seen the hand of Aeolus in the wheat. Finger and fist, he has been about in the fields around hours. It is only now that I feel the courage to wade in. The wheat is an abysm that can wait no longer. Madness is seated in that pit of sheaves. I shall never be cured, but I shall know. You see, the last line where he says, I shall never be cured, it's because he had this idea that he was not fully cured when they released him from the asylum at Sonorny. And because the doctor said that every other parameter has been met, we cannot keep you in a hospital indefinitely. He actually wanted to stay in the hospital. He wanted to get out in the daytime, paint outside, and come back to the hospital. It's a very little strange thing because he didn't feel very confident about staying in the society of men, normally, as we do. He said that, doctors, can I go out in the morning, paint the entire day, and come back in the evening in the asylum once again? The doctor said, but you're so healthy in absolutely every possible way. Why should you stay in an asylum? You should go out. So he says that he always had that fear. He was not cured totally. Now here he says, I may not be cured, but I shall know. You see, this is a very powerful thing. Things that frighten us, prospects that daunt us. Normally, as I said, dystopia is all about losing the battle against these prospects in the mind, the specters in the mind. In dystopian times, the first casualty is hope. That's the first casualty. And that's an immense thing to happen. Entire societies and individuals living in it actually fall into a pit, a dark pit from which there is almost no way out. You might get the vaccine, but what is the vaccine against this kind of negativity? To find that vaccine, to find that cure, to find that panacea, if I could put it that way, is a work of tremendous philosophical and psychological nerve or strength. As a civilization, again, fall back to those things. We have to have the power and, of course, the intelligence to come out of that situation. What Van Gogh says is that here is a scared artist, a scared man, and yet he deserves to go on. He says that come what may, whatever the consequences, the personal costs, I will have to go into the weeds. I will have to explore the boundaries that daunt me, especially the ones that daunt me. I will have to try to go beyond all of that. See within, see behind those pales and forts, and see if I could come back. So again, I refer to Hamlet, the undiscovered country from whose born no traveler ever returns. He was referring, of course, to death. Here it is almost a near-death experience, things that we are frightened about. When we approach them, they are almost as big a bogey as death itself. To go beyond and to question it philosophically, to come back in one piece, is a big deal, isn't it? So this is the last but one, and the last one is the 4th of July. I will quickly shift to that one. This is the one that you've already seen. Yes, it is called Fields with a Cloudy Sky. The dread of singular existence has always been the madness in my blood. I was not the most gregarious child, but the cloud of being alone or rendering alone had settled like a day's cloud over this wheat field. See, what I'm trying to do is the cloud is not just a physical cloud, it is just blown up from anywhere, any quarter of the sextant, but something that is of his mind, that is blown out of his mind, a darkness, a pall, a negative perception of life and being that has somehow become a cloud on his canvas. So you see, the physical cloud outside finds an antecedent inside him, and the two come together for an artist. So it's easier for the artist now to get into the mood of the painting. There is a mood of a painting. Get into that is very easy now that he can relate to that. That's what he's saying. Firm and unshakable, a vapor that is thick as marble is upon me. Landscapes have this strange way of occurring to you, not as trees and bushes, and sky and heat, but as moods and memories and fears and feelings of futility, at the shipwreck of life upon a calm shore of someone else's life in the past. It is hot, and I have been afraid this last week. The loneliness I bear weighs down upon the loneliness I may have brought about in the lives I have touched, making it a terrible burden. Perhaps that is the meaning of this heat in July. The farmers here keep talking of the wheat every day in the fields and the streets. Even in their card games, they hold bets for and against the patience of clouds and the passion of rain that shall rush in to put an end to this drought. I see the heat differently though. I was crazed with fears of being alone long before they took me to Saint Remy. Little did they know that cutting my ear was like knocking on the silence of closed doors in a long lane of warm, inviting houses. You keep knocking because you know there are warm, sanguine lives behind these doors. You keep knocking till warm turns awful cold in that lane. Day turns to dusk, and still no one would come to the door to answer. No one would open. It is a wonder I didn't cut out both my ears, my eyes. But the bell would have kept sounding, the gongs would suffer they would suffer nightmares. The wood of the door warned my white knuckles and no door would open. They think that if a man cuts out his ear, he's mad. Why do they not see that he was mad with both his ears hanging like a torn cap from his head already? That he can come from the asylum to what they call an asylum, that is life. But you lived every day on a pavement in a lane surrounded by hospitable houses that would not open their doors to you and still seemed happy. But at least they accepted something was amiss with everything. When you live as long as I have in asylums, where they try to cure you of the madness that has taken hold of your reason, you realize that the cure is the disease. The ailment of convalescence is what they give you. You start believing that there is a mend to this loneliness, till everything shouts it back at you. Sorrow me was hot. Like these last days, I came out to August with the heat of sullenness in the pit of my stomach. This sullen heat gathers close to the houses, the haystacks, in the fields, the tavern windows, and yet, like this morning, I can still imagine a cold brush of air combing the helter-skelter stars in the evening, even as wheat rages and snorts like a bull. Sullenness harbored too long can grow into a calmness, an undaunted calmness, like garlic in bad cooking, burning in the gut, and claret like snow on the tongue. Taste of my past, the flavor of this field for me in August. Such a hot and cold day I have not seen. There are things the summer must say before it dies. So you see exactly, loneliness as this corollary or symptom of a larger dystopia. Many of us go through these phases and we think that, oh, this is a very personal predicament that we are passing through. But it is not. The work of great artists, Van Goghs and Shakespeare's and others of this world, what it shows us is that these petty predicaments, as we might construe them to be, are actually much deeper, deep rooted symptoms of a greater malaise, which crystallizes into what might be called, at certain times, dystopia. And now, can I have the fourth and last slide, please? Now, this is a poem, as I said, from that collection of miniature poems. And it's a speaking tree. It's the what you might call the speaking tree. It's a work of Deccani, culture, of course. You can see this. Now, the painter's name is not known. This is early 17th century from Deccan in India. And this is actually the legend of Al-Waqwaq. In Islamic Persian literature, there was this mythical island at the end of the world, to which apparently just a second, let me get this poem out. Yes. So Al-Waqwaq was this mythical city to which Alexander the Great, or Iskandar, as he was called in Persian myths, when he had conquered the whole world, he was at the end of the world. And he came to this island somewhere, they said in India, mythical island, of course, with no geographical locations to it. But he came to this particular island on which there was this speaking tree, very interestingly. And that is the motif, and that's the one that I refer to, which is there at the Salaja Museum. You know, you see instead of fruits, these are all heads of animals, different animals, the antelope, the cheetah, the kangaroo, the lion, the tiger, all these, the fox, fishes. If you look at the bottom, you can see also fishes, you know. So again, all kinds of life, non-human life. And yet there are also a few human beings. Yes, they're visible. They're actually children, apparently, who grow on trees. That was this was the idea. Now, this was the speaking tree, meaning the tree of wisdom. And Alexander is always seen in Persian myths as the philosopher king, who is always prepared to ask questions, who is always prepared to know more. So he goes up to this tree and he asks his questions. This is the final crux. So, without further ado, so I'll just quickly read the poem for you. This is, as I said, the modern take on this particular ancient or 17th century painting and this concept. The poem is called Walk, Walk City. This one was written at the height of the pandemic. I have walked 1,000 miles bathed in sundust, but have not met my brother. Have not died, because I have not been able to tell the fatigue of my story to my brother, my fellow man. What city, friends, is this? I seek something that grows, something whose shadow has grown with it, not masonry that has been put there by alien hands with no root or flower to body forth. There is no shadow in this city, nor no sun. A strange meridian light, whether of the sun or the moon, I cannot make out, sleeps like an old dog in the streets. What country, friends, is this? Shy shadows grow out of the siesta of reclining statues in desolate squares. Is this something Giorgio de Chirico painted? Am I in a museum of his dream? Why are the lanes so deserted? Is it the curfew of spring that empties the city so that birdsong can carry sunlight into the closed hearts of flowers? Is the deaf city merely gnawing at the doorknob to greet the fireworks of a million buds glowing in garden or gutter? Is this Italy then, where the crush of old leaves has sounded loudest in the disquiet of busy crossings, and where a lark's cry ricochets a frenzy between an old sky and an old earth, and comes to rest on a man's closed temple? It is too hot for Italy. This is some other country. A tree, like a tree in a painting, where you notice the craft that goes into the making of a leaf for the first time. A tree drawn from the memory of mango, peepal, and banyan. The darkness of its cool shadow, closing your eyes for a moment, stands in its shadow and shouts from bough and blossom like all the radios in a city, left on, sound, unhusbanded, unkeepered, when everyone was in the bath, kitchen, or loo. What world, friends, is this? Have creatures of the wild waded into broadcast boxes? Does the BBC growl like speckled hide against the tangle of mangrove? Or sea serpents swim up the throat of Voice of America? Men and women, absent from the city, have left their echoes in the pores of leaves, in the pollen of flowers on that tree. The echo speaks of a man or a woman, the past tense of a sunlit word it cannot answer or ask any more now. Was this the word for the what is the word for the past tense of sunlight? I came to the city walking for a bit of shadow, to die slowly as life. On this scrabble tree, shadow as the past tense of light and its future has won me a commendation. The animals call from the tree, deepening the din of silence in this wilderness of buildings. And living fish thrash about low branches, insinuating water on hot asphalt. I am on the oasis of the road before a speaking tree, the last Alexander with no Firdausi on walk. As you can very well see, these were those migrant workers walking thousands of kilometers, coming into cities. And cities treating them so inhospitably. They were being seen as parasites, pests, that they are going to spread the pandemic, contagion in our city. So keep them out. Look at the hit that humanity took as a result of all this. And this is where I would want to end my talk to you. I've tried to show you how dystopian realities get crystallized in the minds of artists and writers and how they respond to it as spectrality, sometimes even as an occult suggestion. We know about the importance of the occult in modernist times. Perhaps perception wise, if you look at just human perception, the occult is not very far away. You see, with that last painting, I counted that there are 19 bows and there are 82 animals. 1982, not far, is it? Thank you very much. No. Yeah. I can answer this question.
You can talk to Professor Larry while having lunch or while having tea. You can have many clarifications. But in the academic sessions, the keynote will not have a question. So thank you, Professor Larry, for your wonderful talk on modern painting, especially on Vincent Van Gogh, and also, how these artists have visualized realities, the sufferings, and the melancholy, insecurities, how they brought on their canvas. Somewhere I read and I forgot the artist's name, probably is from Czechoslovakia. Two brothers, two artists brothers. They were born in a well-to-do family, but unfortunately, because of misfortune, the family could not support these two brothers. But these two brothers decide that they should help each other to learning painting. So they take a permission from the family. They go to the capital city. The elder brother decides that he will work as a coal miner and support his younger brother to become an artist. And later on, when he becomes a successful artist, he should support the elder brother. And with this kind of the adjustment, they start when the elder brother goes as a coal miner, the elder brother goes to the university to learn a painting. And after 10 years, the younger brother becomes one of the most celebrated artists. Now the younger brother's the turn will come to help his elder brother. He will tell his elder brother, dear brother, now I have to keep up my promise. Now you join university. Now elder brother shows his fingers. His younger brother says that my fingers can't catch a brush now because at that time there were no machines to pick that blocks, blocks, and he did all with his bare hands. And now his fingers are totally, disfigured now. He can't hold a brush. So see the generosity of this younger brother, usually, we don't feel so gratitude towards the people who help them. But in all his paintings, he puts his elder brother's name and he makes his elder brothers as what we call his source of inspiration. That's what we call the gratitude of which the younger brother showed to the elder brother. It's a great thing. So here, this is what, there's another anecdote. Permit me, I'll tell you. There are many stories. Whether they are true or not, we don't know. But what made him to invade India is that, the stories of India is very, amusing. And many people have come to India for many reasons. Even why China has invaded India, there is one more reason for that. Because these people want to have a longevity, that they should live forever and forever. So India has answer for that longevity. The Indian sages, they lived for 500 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years like that. Alexander also heard about this. So he want to come and he want to have that kind of, because he is, I mean, has this insecurity that someday his commanders may have a coup on him. So therefore, if he is young forever, so nobody can stage a coup on him. So therefore, he invades India and it sends his commanders, go and find out those saints who can help him out. They find a sage. They'll ask the sage, our king, our monarch want to see you. Now, if he is monarch, he may be monarch for him, but not monarch for him. Let him come to me. I will not come there. So that fellow will, because he want the answer for his question. So he goes there. Then that man tells that, you have to go to a so and so place. There you find a water. You drink that water, you will live forever. Then he goes in search of that pound with his commanders. Finally, he reaches somewhere in the Himalayan range like that. Then he doesn't want his commanders to drink that water, because if these fellows also will live forever, then again the problem will come there. He said, you people be here, I'll go and come. He'll go there and is about to have the water. Suddenly he hears a voice. A crow says, stop. Then, I said, why are you asking me to stop? See, I have taken this water and my age is 10,000 years old. Many of my siblings and also many generations have died, but I have no death. What's the use of being alive when all your people have gone now, isn't it? The same thing will happen to you also. All your children will die, all your family members will die, all your commanders will die, and the age and you live forever and forever. And what's the use of living with all kinds of these things? And there are nobody, with you. Then he says that I should not drink this water. I should have a death. So then from there he goes there. So these kind of insecurities makes man to invent many things. And now dystopia is prepares us to live in this insecure world, to live what we call in this kind of misfortune world like that. Thank you, Darshish, for giving the lecture. I thank all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor A. Karunakar, Honorable Dean, Faculty of Arts, Osmania University, for very kindly giving us your consent to chair this session and sparing your most valuable time to be with us here today. So, thank you very much, Professor. And thank you, my friend and colleague, with academic Professor Devashish Lahiri, for a wonderful keynote lecture. So, we now break for lunch and we meet in the lunch lounge. Thank you.